Hey there. I hope you did relatively well with the calculator project from that last lesson. If you got stuck, or if you're just curious as to how I would do this, yeah, this is the video for you, because I'm just gonna do this thing. I don't have a plan. I don't know how this is supposed to look. We can use everything that we have learned already, and that's all we're going to use. I just want to let you know that in JavaScript there are better ways to do things than what we have currently learned. But with that said, those are also more complicated ways. And this is a JavaScript Essentials course, not a complete JavaScript web development course. So this is really just to get you going as a junior to intermediate JavaScript developer. So I have my index.html file open here. I'm also going to open the JavaScript file, and I probably won't need the style file at all. Although I might maybe get into that. I don't know. Don't hold your breath with that one though. So the first thing I want to do is think, what happens when this form is submitted? Well, as of right now, nothing happens. So we go on submit is equal to, let's just call this calculator, calculator with parentheses. And so as soon as this whole form is submitted, it's supposed to run this function. Well, this function doesn't exist yet, so let's create it. So we know this function calculator has to spit out one answer. And so here is our current page. Now, if we look at the code, our answer is below the form. So somewhere in this area where my mouse is swinging around, that's where the answer is going to show up. And in order to change the content in there, we know we need to select the answer. We also know that in order to do any math, we need to select number 1 and number 2 in order to either add, minus, divide, or multiply the numbers together. So the first thing we need to do is we need to create selectors. Now, we don't know too much about scope, but we do know that a variable inside of a function stays inside of a function. We're going to talk about this at a later date. We're in a later lesson, but any variables that are declared above and before a function are also capable of being used inside the function. So it's the reverse mentality of what you have learned already. We're not going to get into that because that adds a layer of complexity, but let's put that in your back pocket for now. We're going to use that a little bit later. For now, let's just create a selector. So let's call this the answer selector. Document.querySelector answer. So what we're selecting here, let's just make that a little bigger, is we are selecting this div element. Now we also need to select num1 and num2. So variable num1 document.querySelector num1. I believe it was an ID, right? Yeah, ID, and num1 and num2. So I'm just going to copy that over. And let's just change both instances there. I just changed both of them at the same time. If you've got a nice editor like Sublime or Atom, you can select numerous of the exact same value, and you can change the whole thing in here at the same time in multiple places. It's really nice. But that's all I did. Nothing fancy there. It's just a nice editor trick. And I also need to select the select. Now I'm going to leave the select out for now because we don't know which one is selected. So what we want to do is we just want to make sure that these numbers are actually selecting the right selectors. So let's do this. Console log answer isn't going to do anything because there's nothing in there. We just want to see num1, num2. Save that, refresh your page. I'm going to open up our console. Let's move this over so we can see more of the page. 1, 2, and nothing happened. Well, nothing happened because the page actually refreshed. And that's just because HTML, when you submit a form, it's going to try to do whatever it is the form is supposed to do. It's going to use its get method or post method, whatever you tell it to do. It's going to go to whatever action file you tell it to do. We have specified none of that. So instead of doing on submit, because we don't want the page to refresh, let's move that to the button, change the button type to a regular button because it doesn't technically need to submit the form. And we can say instead of on submit, on click. So now this button is just a regular button. It's not submitting any form. Technically, that renders this form useless. And that's a lot of the power behind JavaScript. You can break out of traditional HTML hierarchy like that. So now it's going to run this calculator function, and it's going to grab num1 and 2 and log them. Refresh the page. 1, 2. Document query select is not a function. Obviously, that's because it's query selector. Refresh the page, try it again. 1, 2. There we go. It's selecting number 1 and it's selecting number 2. Cool. As a shortcut, let's just do this. Let's add the value, save, refresh, try it again. There we go. We have 1 and 2. So all we did there was we chained this. Well, actually, it's technically not chaining because we didn't use any methods or functions. All we did was say, hey, document, find num2, and then get the value of it, and store that in a variable called num2. That's all it is. So now to make sure that answer is working, let's say answer.innerHTML is equal to num1 plus num2. I don't know what this is going to do because the values are supposed to be strings, but JavaScript also recognizes when numbers are just numbers inside of a string. Regardless, at this point, it doesn't matter because all I'm doing is testing to see if anything shows up in there. There we go. And so all this is doing is it's appending them because JavaScript currently thinks that these are strings, not numbers. So let's turn num1 and num2 into actual numbers. Refresh, 1, and let's go 54. And now we have 55. So at least it's adding. So we know that works, but why is that working? We haven't told it to do anything in particular. Now remember when I told you there was one hard part about this? I left something out. The thing that I left out was, how do you figure out which one of these is currently selected? Well, the first thing we have to do is we have to get the selector. So let's call this select is equal to document.querySelector. And it's the only select on the page, so we're going to select that as the entire element, because that's all we need. Now, how do we tell which one is currently selected? Well, let's try this. Select.options. And this is where a little bit of Googling came in. This is not unknown territory for you. This is just a little bit new. It's just pushing your boundaries just a little bit. And we say, in the array, select.selected index. Save that. Refresh the page. And, well, that's giving us something. It's giving us an option element. Cool, okay. We can work with that. Is it value that we want? Yeah, look at that. We were going to be selecting the option and the value. So let's go back. There we go. It's adding. It's going to minus. It's going to divide. Cool. So now we have some way of working with that. Let's put that back into a variable. And we'll call that operator. So now we have everything we need to calculate our basic formula. We have the answer section, number 1, number 2, the select box. So what is that going to be? Add, minus, divide, or multiply. And then all we have to do is perform the calculation. So what we're going to do here is we're going to return in multiple areas. And this is a little bit different, but it is totally allowed. So we say if operator is equal to add. So the operator is getting the options, the selected index, and then the value. Select the option and whichever one is selected, and it's going to match one of these values. So let's say it's going to add. What do we do if it's going to add? Well, we can say return num1 plus num2. Now it's adding these numbers together. Else, operator is equal to minus, and we can basically do the same thing, but the only difference is we change the operator because this is a minus. Now there's another way to do this, and this is a terrible way, but I'm going to let you know right now because it's important not to do this. There is a function in most languages, and it's usually called eval, which you can put raw JavaScript in here. The user can put raw JavaScript in here, and it will execute it. The reason that's bad is because you are giving the user complete control over your JavaScript. And that's not what a program is. A program is a defined box with certain rules in it that state you can and cannot do certain things, and within those bounds, you have complete freedom. But outside of that, you're not allowed. You're not allowed to be outside that box. Now, the reason I'm telling you that is because eval is used by a lot of newer developers because it's easier, it's simple, it just works. And it makes writing this kind of code, if, else if, else if, else if, else, which is what we're going to be doing, it makes that obsolete. You don't require it anymore. But that's bad development, and we're not going to be doing that. And if we were in a physical classroom right now, I would get all of you to look me in the eye and say that you will not be running eval.